In this lecture, we'll talk about how to create HTML forms. First, we'll do a demonstration on exactly how our forms should work. Then we'll talk about how to create an HTML form. We'll talk about the difference between GET versus POST request. And then afterwards, we'll talk about validating our forms, and then also making sure that when users click on submit and their form isn't valid, that all the information they did enter in is preserved so they don't have to re-enter it in. Okay, so this is a demonstration how we want our forms to work. This is the register page for MAP course, and if the user, say first of all, Fred here is going to register. Let's say he messes up these passwords here and they're not equal, and he clicks to register. We should get some sort of error message showing that they're wrong and then highlighting the fields that are wrong. Other things that could happen is Fred could forget his login address. I'm also checking this regular expression. Now let's say that Fred does get everything right, except for he forgets his email, he messes it up. So I'm using a regular expression to test this to make sure that it's a valid email address. And then if you notice, all the information is staying here. If he messes up his password, notice his login and his email stay in even though the passwords don't match. So this is the kind of form that we want. It's user-friendly. It highlights the errors. It fills in the fields that the user got correct and leaves them there. Even the incorrect ones, you might want to leave those there so they can just fix them really quick. And then when they get it all right, I won't actually register a new user for this, but when they get it all right, then it should go to a confirmation page. In the partials lecture, we finished up this site where we had different links, and as we visited each link, we highlighted the link that we were on, and we that way we could kind of tell what section that we are in inside of our web page. From now on, I'm going to create new pages inside of this framework that we've set up. That way we can eventually kind of create a complete working site. And if you recall, I never actually created a projects page. We put in the link, but we never created it, and I'm going to change that to be register. So this is in the functions file right here, and this is the function that generates your nav bar or navigation bar, and I am going to change the projects link to a register page. And as I do that, I have the register link right there. I probably won't include this functions file in the source code for the lecture, because the only thing I changed was that I'll change in this file is this register link. So now I have this register page. It's set up so if we click on it, it's there, but there's nothing in there. So to get started, create a PHP code block, and we're going to require the header PHP, and then down below in another PHP code block, we're going to require the footer, and then right here we'll just put a message saying we're going to register. And then, of course, we have to print our header out. So this is going to be register, and the section we're in is register. And now when we click on the register link, that's what we get. So the first step, this is going to be a page where we can register users. This lecture is really about using HTML forms. So this same concept can be applied to lots of different things that we might want to eventually insert into our database so that we can pull it out and display it in other web pages. Also, as users register for our site, we can store their information in the database. And the first step with being able to register is creating the HTML form. So we'll do that down here. So we start off with a form tag, and most of you should remember how to do forms from your IT 240 class. And then we'll have a login and a text input field, and the name equals login, and then let me do a line break here. And then next we'll maybe have a place for them to put their email. Right here. And then maybe a password. And we'll also want them to confirm it. So we do this to make sure that they didn't mistype their password, and then so they create an account and immediately don't know the password. So name will be a confirm password. And for now, we'll just store this information. If you actually want to register, if you do register your users, you probably want to include more information, maybe like a first name, a last name, a phone number, address, other information that you might want to store in your database. And so you might want to collect that, and you'll put more fields in here. For your assignment, you'll have to add in radio buttons and text field or text boxes and select boxes as well, just to show each one you have to work with it a little bit differently. So that's what you'll have to do for your assignment. But for this, I'm just going to include this, and then we'll also include a submit button. I'll skip the name because I don't care to have anything sent with the submit button, but the value will just say register right there. So now if we refresh this page, we have our login, email, password, and a confirm password, and a way to register. So if we fill this out, Fred at BYUHawaii.edu, and then we'll fill in a password right there. And if you notice, we ended up, when we click submit, we end up going back to the same page. That's because on my form I haven't put in an action. And we also send this with a GET request. And by sending a form with a GET request, what it does is it puts all the variables up here and name value pairs. So we have login equals Fred, email equals Fred at BYUH.edu, password equals Fred, and confirm password equals Fred. So all of these values ended up on the query string. And that's probably not what you want for your registration. I think the user might kind of freak out if he sees that the password that he typed in as he's registering just kind of appears at the top in his address bar. So we really need to send this as a GET or instead of a get request, we need to send it as a post request. So we'll include the action tag because it's required, but we'll leave it blank so that it goes back to the register field. And then we'll also go make the method a post instead of a get request. And so we'll go back and fill in this form again. And now when we click register, if you look up here in the address bar, well, it shouldn't be up there. The reason why it is because I didn't refresh the form. So if I go back to the page, so the form that I just submitted was, it didn't have an action or a method defined because I never refreshed the page. And now this is the current version of the page, and when we view the source, you can see that the method is a post method. So now when we type in the login, and fill it in, we click register. When we go up here, we don't include the information. Now back to here, in this action we can fill in any other PHP page. So when someone in a browser clicks a submit button, it's really like clicking on a link that sends them to another page. The only difference is that it sends the information that the person filled out in a form to the other page as well. So that other page will usually grab the information and process it, make sure everything's correct, and if it is, it'll register the person by inserting the information they submitted into the database, and they'll present some sort of confirmation saying you are registered. So that's when the user clicks submit. So what we're going to do is we're still going to leave this action blank because we really want our forms to be user friendly. So if they mistype something, the fields are still filled in, as we discussed in the demo. So it's easier to do that if we submit it to this same page. So now this page is going to be, this page P page right here is going to be dual purpose. One purpose will be to print up a form asking the person to register, and other times when people hit the page we're going to actually process all the information and then add it into the database. So how we're going to tell the difference whether we present a form to them or whether we present a confirmation and process the information, we're going to look to see if they did a post or a get. If they do a get request, then we'll present the form. If they do a post, that means they submitted the form, so we should process it. So we'll do that. Okay, so I forgot a semicolon there, but the first thing that we'll do is figure out whether or not the request is a get request or a post request. And so how we do that is with an if statement. And it's called the request method right here. So the server is a super global variable that contains a lot of parameters on what's inside the server, and also a lot of information about the request. And it also includes this one thing, the request method. So if the request method is equal to a post, then we know that it is a post request. If not, it's a get request. So let's check to see if this works. We'll just print out a post request right here, and next we'll print out a get down here. So we can test this to see if it's working. We'll go to the registered link, and as you see, we see the get variable right there. showing that it's a GET request, and then if I fill this in and click register, we see that this is a POST request. Another thing with the POST request, if we try to refresh it after we submitted it, is saying, are you sure you want to send the form again? Now this is like if you're going to buy something, you're going to click submit, put your credit card in and click submit, and then you click refresh, you might actually place your order twice. So this is making sure that you don't place your order twice. They put these in most modern browsers to make sure that people don't put them in twice, but of course we can send the form again and see that it was a POST request there. So now we know that this is working, and so now let's next, before we process the data, that's really what we want to do here. Process the information sent by the form, and then down here is where we will, if there's any setup work that we need to do, but I'm going to do something else, and so I'm going to create a variable here called valid post. Now I'm going to assume that it's a valid post, and then there'll be several ways where we can turn this thing to false. The first way will be if it's not even a post. So we'll set valid post to false here. Okay. We'll also set it to false in cases up to here, meaning that it could be a post but it's invalid. So we set it false here because we don't have a post. We'll set it false here if something the user sent on the form isn't quite right, like if their passwords didn't match or any other error. And just to check this, create a PHP block right here. And we'll go if it's a valid post. Sure we have our $sign there. If we have a valid post, we'll echo out valid post. And if it isn't, we'll say echo out not a valid post. Okay, so when we click on this, we see not a valid post because it's a GET request. But if we go in here and register, we see that it's a valid post because we're not validating anything right now. We still have to add that in. I'm gonna get out of PHP mode for a little bit, start it up again, and I'm actually just gonna delete this. I'll tab this over. And then we'll end the else right here. So now if it isn't a valid post, we'll present the form. If it is a valid post, we'll just say you are registered. Now this is in HTML, so I don't need an echo statement or anything like that. So now let's test it. When we click on the link, we see this form and it says register. We might want to add a note here. Welcome, please register. For my cool site. So when we click on that, it says welcome, please register for my cool site. If we add things there, now we see that you are registered. So that's how, now the user, if he did that, they would think that they are registered for our site, but we haven't really done anything with their data other than recognize that they submitted a form to our page. So now that we have that, now we actually have to process the information instead of just ignore it. So the first thing that I might want to check is to make sure that the passwords match. Now normally you use the $get for all the information they sent on the form, but since this is now a post request, we use the post instead. So that's a key difference when we're processing a post. We use the post instead. So the post password is equal to the confirm password. And now I'm going to say if they're not equal to each other, then we know that it didn't pass our validation, so now we need to send an error. So now we'll go valid post equals false. So now when we try to register, when Fred tries to register, if his passwords don't match, you'll see the form again. Now, as you can tell, when that happens, this isn't very user-friendly because Fred filled out his login and his email, and if we have more fields here, he probably spent some time here. And just because he goofed on the passwords, he now has to re-enter in everything. So, we don't want Fred to have to go through all that trouble. So how we're going to save him that trouble is we're going to save information down here, and what we'll do is we'll go if the request method is a post method equals a post right there, then we can create a couple of variables. Another place that I can do this is actually might be a little simpler with the logic, but another place I can do this is right here. If after we validate everything, if we don't have a valid post right here, and what we can do is we can create some variables like the login is equal to and we can also include the email. Now, we usually want to save them from typing everything in. One example that we don't want to save is the password every time. Just as a general rule, you should never ever send the password back to the user, just to enhance security. So if you notice on most sites, when you goof on something, they always blank out the password fields, even if that wasn't what you goofed on. So just as a security caution, you don't have to do this for passwords, but for everything else we need to save it. And then we'll come down into our form and we'll go ahead and put value fields, value equals, and then a PHP code block really quick, and we can echo out the login right there. And I'm just going to copy and paste this right here, and here I'll echo out the email. So let's go back and see how that works. So Fred spends some time, wants to register for your site, but now he goofs and he doesn't get the passwords to match. And we submit this again, and now we see Fred right there. There's something that's a little messed up with that email. Right there, the value field. So we'll check on that, but it's at least filled back in. And what I messed up on is I didn't get this ending quote mark. So now that I fixed my quote mark, we'll have this form up again. And now we'll see what happens when Fred registers. But in the process messes up his password, and as you can see the page is refreshed. It's still filled in, but now the passwords are gone. Now we'd like to tell Fred that he messed up his password, So to do that, I'm going to do a couple of things. First, I'm going to add a variable called password error equals true. And that lets me, I might want to say password match error because there could be a couple errors. Maybe you just left the password blank, so I'm going to call this a password match error. And then down here, right here, we can start a PHP code block. And now we can go if, another variable that I'll create, maybe start off errors equals false. So if we have some errors right here, and then so we created the variable errors equals false, and now we'll also say errors equals true. So we created this variable errors right here. So now we know that there's some errors on this page, and now we can go if there's a password match error, would like to print something out, echo passwords do not match. Okay, so that helps us there. And now we can register again. Of course, now the passwords match, they're both blank, but if the passwords don't match, now we see passwords do not match. Now that's kind of hard to see, so we should probably highlight that. That's why I did this. So we exit out of PHP mode, enter in PHP mode again. Exit out of it. Enter init for this right there. And then around this, I'm going to surround this by a div tag so we can highlight it. Div. Of course, the styling should go in your style sheet, but for quickness on this presentation, I'll keep this. Let's do the border be thin. Dotted and red. I think that's how we can do some styling right there. And now we get this little thing right here, this little red border. You might want to make that width 30%. Kind of shorten it down a little bit. So now we have the passwords do not match. 30% may be a little extreme, so we do that. Of course, I can make the text red as well. But now I can have all of my errors show up here. We'll put in line breaks as well after each one. So now they have an error message. This is good to see error messages up at the top, but it also might be good to be able to highlight the fields where highlight the fields that are in trouble. So to do that, we're going to have to add some things into here. If there's a password match error there, then we want to do one thing. else just print up the form the way it is. So tap this over, and then we'll also copy it and paste it in here. Enter PHP, and we'll begin it again. So now in here we can somehow style these. So one way is to kind of put a span tag around this with a little bit of a margin, and then you can put the background of the span tag to be red, and that kind of puts a little red box around the input field. But for this lecture, I'm just going to put a span tag here. And we'll go style it up. Again, the styling should probably go in the CSS style sheets, but so you should have a class name, and then we'll have that span tag. And we'll repeat this for the confirm password. Put that on the next line. And we'll stop the span right here. And so now, when they send it, now these fields have turned red to highlight the fields that are missing. So that's how we can do this all with one PHP page. Now we still have to make sure that the regular register page looks normal, and then when their passwords do match, it just says you are registered. So let's now we want to include more validations. I'll include one more. I want to make sure that the login right here, that they actually put some information in, that they don't submit a login, submit a form with a blank login. So I have a bunch of people with no usernames. So let's go ahead and check that. Eventually, when we start working with the database, we'll also want to check to make sure the login is unique. We also might want to check to make sure that email is unique as well. And when we get to the database, I'll show you how you can check that. But let's go ahead and we'll check to see if the login is blank or not. Okay, so we'll check to see if login that was sent in, and there's a function called string length, and you should have read about this in the strings chapter in the textbook. It's actually the strings section in the functions chapter of the textbook. That returns how many characters are in there, and if there are less than 3 characters in there, then we won't have a valid login. Now you might want them to be able to create logins with 1 character, or then you can just use 0 instead of 3. Alright, and you can use it, is it equal to 0, then you know it's blank. So if it's less than 3, I'm going to say they don't have a valid login. So I can say valid post equals false. And then login errors equals true, and then we'll also set errors to true as well. And that means that down here we can go if login errors, that's what I called it, and I'll just say login too short. Instead of passwords do not match. So let's see what happens here. So Fred forgets to put in a login and it says login too short. So now we need to highlight this again. So if login errors right here, and we'll do else, and we'll break this out in PHP blocks. Copy this, put it both places, and we'll put this on a new line. I'm going to copy this, and make sure I make it login as well. So now we'll resend this, and now that highlighted login. Problem is it's putting login in twice, so we gotta delete this original one that we copied out of there, and now we highlight that field and we have a little error box. I'm gonna make this solid. I think that might look a little bit better, stick out a little more. Now we have that. Another thing that we might want to check is to see if maybe they have both errors, so the passwords don't match. And now we see that all the fields that are wrong are highlighted. So we want to check each case right there, and we can see that those look nice. So I'll let you, as an exercise to the viewer, to figure out how they would validate the rest of them. You might have to do a little bit more logic if you want to make sure that the person actually uses a password of a certain length, because you might have a password match error or another error. So then there would be like then you might want to create a password errors variable that highlights the passwords when something went wrong. We might only want to highlight one password if they leave it blank. But all of the validations will be right here. And then if they're not a valid post, you save all the variables later on. Another thing that I'll leave to you to figure out is with select boxes or radio boxes or check boxes. To fill them back in is not as easy as just putting the value in here. You have to put like a selected on the one that they selected, and that'll take some more code to be able to have the form filled in the way they left it. And you will have to do that on your assignments. You'll have to make sure that for each thing that they entered in, that it's preserved when they get errors. And the last thing that we'll do after we've done all of this, we could go into here, and if it is a valid post still, right here we'll just echo out putting info in the database. So now if Fred finally gets his act together and does everything right, let's see on line 26, if Fred finally gets everything, gets his act together and gets everything right, then we'll put the information in the database. Now this is just a comment, it's not something that I'd want to leave in the site.